They took Grandpa's fishing boat without a word, dragged it off like it was junk, claimed it violated lake rules. Then they called the cops, thinking they'd shut me down too. But 5 minutes later, after one call and a fast deal, I own the entire lake. Now, their clubhouse sits on my water, and their HOA meetings, they happen with my permission, or not at all. T. Understand what happened with that boat. You need to understand the man behind it. My grandfather wasn't just some guy who liked to fish. He was the kind of man who treated a quiet lake morning like church. Before the sun crested the pine trees, he'd be out there, weathered ball cap, thermos of black coffee, and that old aluminum boat with the squeaky bench and faded registration numbers. To him, the lake wasn't a hobby. It was peace. It was memory. It was home. That little boat had been tied up to the same wooden dock for over 40 years. It saw every season: fog in the spring, cicadas in the summer, leaves falling like confetti in the fall. It was part of the landscape, part of the lake's rhythm. Back then, the lake wasn't surrounded by manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. It was wild, mostly untouched. A few old cabins dotted the edges, and the only rules were the ones you respected because they were yours. Over time, things changed. Developers came. Surveyors walked lines. Trees got cleared, and roads carved their way in. One by one, homes sprouted like weeds around the waterline. Before long, there were paddleboards and white fences and HOA newsletters about noise ordinances and lake access etiquette. But that dock, that boat, that corner of the lake, still ours, still Grandpa's. And after he passed, it became mine. He never made a big deal about the deed. He was like that, humble, grounded. Just handed me a file folder one day with a wink. You'll take care of it when I'm gone. Inside that folder was the original land deed, a couple of water rights documents, and the handwritten boundary sketches he'd kept for years. They were backed up by certified county survey, too. The lake, or at least the majority of it, including our shore and dock, was part of a private tract he bought back in the 70s. Long before the subdivision had a name, or anyone thought to call it a community feature. After he passed, I got the paperwork updated, filed everything officially, and even added my name as successor owner of the lake parcel, surface rights, shoreline, and legal maintenance authority. The HOA didn't get a copy, and they never asked. See, when the homes popped up, they were built around a myth, that the lake was communal, shared by everyone in the new subdivision, that it was part of their monthly dues and committee votes. They wrote newsletters calling it the Whisper Lake amenity, but it was never theirs. Not legally, not structurally, not on any county map. Sure, they could fish along the designated common area on the eastern edge, a slice donated by a developer who didn't even own the full lake. But the rest, including our dock, our bank, our end of the water, privately owned. And I never said a word because, frankly, I never needed to. For years, I let things be. Every now and then, I'd drive up from the city, unlock the gate, and spend a weekend at the old cabin. Clean the gutters, oil the dock chains, maybe toss a line in if the sun was right. Nobody bothered me, and I didn't bother them. But I saw the changes. The lake that used to hum quietly in the morning started to echo with HOA chatter. Rules about approved watercraft, signs about quiet hours, and little laminated warnings tacked to the community bulletin board. Then came the Lake Use Committee. Then came Karen. I met her once, briefly, during one of my spring cleanup visits. She walked right up to my dock like she owned the soil under her shoes and asked if I had filed a float plan with the HOA. Float plan? I blinked. All water activity must be approved for safety tracking, she said. We log usage in case of emergencies. You know, for liability. Ma'am, I said, I've been fishing this dock since before your cul-de-sac existed. She smiled, tight-lipped. That may be, but we like to keep things orderly around here. She turned and left before I could say more. And I didn't follow. That's the kind of man my grandfather raised me to be. But in hindsight, that was the first shot fired. After that, I started noticing little things. Fishing lines cut. Dokrupis untid. A laminated, unauthorized structure, subject to removal, sign mysteriously stapled to one of the dock posts. The boat, Grandpa's boat, was still there, still floating, but I could tell it was being watched. Still, I didn't make noise. I just kept the papers close. Until one morning, they crossed the line. I pulled into the drive and walked down to the lake like I always did. But the dock was empty. No boat. No termos. No esquiaquivents. Just the bare dock and a yellow nylon tag fluttering in the wind. Item removed by HOA for code violation. Contact board to resolve. That's when something snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't panic. I walked back to the truck, opened the glove box, and pulled out the folder Grandpa gave me. Because this wasn't about a boat anymore. This was about who that boat belonged to and what that lake stood for. The dock was empty. And not just someone took it for a spin, kind of empty. I mean stripped bare, nothing left, padlock clipped, kind of empty. No Grandpa's boat. No tete rope. No note. Just a plastic yellow tag fluttering on a nail, slapped right into the wood like a parking violation. Removed. HOA lake use compliance. Unauthorized watercraft abandoned beyond approved schedule. For information, contact Whisper Ridge Board. Property code 7.6.2 inch. I stood there for a good minute, just staring. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't disbelief. It was that cold, coiling kind of anger. The kind that rises slow and steady. Not a wildfire, but a control burn. The kind that doesn't need shouting, just proof. And I had plenty of that. I took a breath and walked straight to the HOA office. A converted two-room cottage painted beige with a flower bed out front and a sign that read, "Community care starts here." Apparently, community care now included stealing private property. I stepped inside and asked the woman behind the counter, clipboard, tight bun, HOA lanyard, about the boat. "Oh, are you the owner of the aluminum vessel we removed from Dock 12? She asked like she was asking about a trash can. "Yes," I replied, "and you need to return it. It was classified as abandoned," she said, not even looking up from her screen. "We followed our lake use protocol." "It wasn't abandoned," I said slowly. "It was on private dockage, on private lakefront, on land I own." Her head tilted. Then she clicked a walkie-talkie on her desk. "Karen, you want to come up front? We've got a situation." Karen arrived exactly how I expected her to. High-waisted khakis, HOA windbreaker, clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon, and a smile that could curdle milk. "Hello," she said, already smug. "Can I help you?" "You can tell me where my grandfather's boat is," I said, "and then you can explain why it was taken off my private dock." She blinked. "Once. That boat has been unmoved for over a year. Under community rules, if a vessel is left unregistered or idle beyond the usage limit." "Karen," I interrupted, pulling out the folded copy of my lake deed, "you don't own the lake, and neither does the HOA." I unfolded the document and laid it on the counter between us. Parcel number, owner name, county seal. I watched her expression start to shift, just a flicker like a storm cloud cracking light for the first time. This doesn't change the fact that you called my family's property abandoned," I said calmly. "Then you seized it without notice. That's theft." "Excuse me," she snapped, pointing at the office door. "I don't appreciate being threatened in my own workspace. If you don't leave, I'll be forced to involve law enforcement." "Good," I said. "Call them." She paused. "What?" "Call them," I repeated. "I want them to hear this too." 5 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up and parked outside the HOA office. 2 deputies stepped out, both looking slightly bored but professional. They walked in with the kind of neutral body language you only get from people who've responded to too many petty calls in quiet neighborhoods. "Hi, folks," one of them said. "We got a disturbance report." Karen immediately started talking. This man entered our office and began aggressively demanding property be returned. Property that was already addressed by our board's vote under community regulations. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I reached into my folder and handed one of the deputies a copy of the deed, along with a printed summary of the lake's history, zoning map, and a notarized boundary confirmation from the county office. He scanned the papers, flipped a couple pages, then looked up. "Sir, this shows you own the entire lake parcel?" "Yes," I said, "and the dock, and the land the boat was on. That boat has been on my family's property since 1982. Karen opened her mouth, but the deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, did the HOA confirm land ownership before removing the boat?" "We assumed, based on prior community use, it was public amenity space." "Assumed," he echoed. "Did you check county records?" We followed our internal guidelines, she insisted. He looked back at me, then down at the paperwork again. Everything here looks airtight. You own the water rights. Surface and subsurface, I said. Page 3. He whistled softly. Okay then. Ma'am, I'm going to strongly advise that your office return the vessel immediately. And I'd recommend you consult legal counsel before touching any property on that lake again. Karen stood there, red creeping in her cheeks like a slow-burn sunburn. Are you saying the HOA has no jurisdiction over the lake? The deputy turned toward her fully now. I'm saying unless you can produce documentation that supersedes his deed, you have no authority to regulate, seize, or fine anything on that water. The silence was deafening. When I left the office, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked out over my lake, and nodded. I'd given them years of silence. They gave me 5 minutes of insult, and I gave them 1 page of truth. Sometimes that's all it takes. The next morning, I returned to the lake with a metal clipboard and a small folding table. No fichting growth, no doxchus, just a deed, a stack of certified letters, and a folding lawn chair with a better memory than Karen's entire rulebook. I set up right by the old dock, which now had notice of removal spray-painted on the wooden beams by the HOA, as if their graffiti could overwrite the county's property lines. That's when I began the quiet cleanup of their fiction. The first letter I delivered was to the Whisper Ridge HOA board, hand-delivered, signed for, and time-stamped. It included a certified copy of the recorded deed showing my sole ownership of the lake, including the shoreline up to 25 feet inland, a topographical and zoning map highlighting my parcel boundaries, a copy of my grandfather's original purchase agreement, notarized, a cease and desist demand requiring immediate removal of all signage, references, or enforcement tied to lake governance, a 72-hour deadline to return my grandfather's boat, unaltered, undamaged, and without further incident. I didn't threaten. I didn't rant. I just submitted paperwork so heavy with truth that it sank their entire fantasy of ownership. Later that day, I filed a copy of the complaint with the county assessor's office, along with a public notice, to residents and the HOA of Whisper Ridge. As of official date, all management and enforcement claims over lake name by the HOA are null and void. This lake is privately owned. Unauthorized regulation, impoundment, or fee collection is illegal. Future violations will be prosecuted under property and harassment statutes. I made sure to post that notice online at the local town office and, most importantly, on the HOA's public forum. You can imagine how that went. At first, there was silence. Then came the comments. J'arrête. Wait, we don't own the lake. Britanniez-vous. We just paid for a lake cleanup project last quarter. Where did that money go? Mike H. So, Karen's boat club and the permit fees were fake? Sarah P. I knew something was off. She tried fining me for using a kayak without a wristband. And my favorite, Greg T. Bro bought the lake before we even had sidewalks, and Karen acted like she built it with her bare hands. The community reaction hit like a wave. The residents weren't just surprised, they were betrayed. Most of them had paid dues thinking they were maintaining a shared asset. Some had even bought their homes under the assumption that lake access was a legal perk of ownership. Karen and her cronies had let that belief stand, and worse, had profited from it. Permits, rules, fake inspections, impoundment threats, a so-called fishing club with annual dues and restricted hours. It wasn't just overreach. It was fabrication. Meanwhile, I filed a formal damages claim for unauthorized seizure and impoundment of private property, the boat, public misrepresentation of land and water ownership, harassment and attempted enforcement without legal standing, property defacement for the notice of removal they had spray-painted on my dock. I didn't demand a crazy amount, just enough to make a point, and pay for the pressure washing, the repairs, and the time I'd spent being polite when I should have been filing lawsuits. Karen tried one last stand. She sent out a shaky board clarification memo to the neighborhood listserv claiming the issue was still being reviewed by legal advisors and that the HOA remains confident in its historical use claim over the lake. Problem was, I had already uploaded every legal document to the county portal, where it was now publicly searchable. Within 24 hours, 2 real estate agents in the neighborhood updated their listings to remove lake privileges. That memo? It didn't slow the unraveling. It poured gasoline on it. 2 days later, my grandfather's boat reappeared. No epalegi, no explanation, just quietly placed at the base of my dock overnight, like a thief sneaking back stolen goods and hoping no one would notice. But I noticed. I inspected the hull. No damage. No scratches. Everything intact. I checked the oars and the tackle box. Everything in place. His old thermos still rolling around under the seat like it had never left. I smiled. Then I walked back up the dock, installed a new set of motion trigger trail cameras, and posted 3 signs. Private lake. No trespassing. Property owned and maintained by protagonist name. Violators will be prosecuted under County Statute 18.4.3. Just like that, the lake was silent again. Still, mine. But more than that, it was now factually public that the HOA had been lying. They weren't just wrong. They had built a foundation of rules on water they never owned. And all it took to expose it was 1 file folder, 1 boundary map, and 1 grandson who knew better than to let the past be rewritten. The boat came back in the same way it had been taken, quietly, in the dark, and without a word. No knock at the door. No email. No HOA apology letter. Just a dull clunk on the dock one morning as I stepped outside with my coffee, and there it was, tied neatly like it had never left. Same anchor rope. Same rusted tackle box. Same memories. They hadn't cleaned it. Hadn't tried to fix the faded paint. It was returned, not with respect, but with reluctance. Like a kid sneaking a broken vase back on the shelf and hoping no one noticed. But I noticed, and I remembered. I let the silence sit for a day or 2. Let the HOA stew in the quiet tension now bubbling beneath their carefully trimmed hedges and mailbox uniformity. Then I got to work. I printed out a large weatherproof sign, aluminum, etched with a reflective coat. It read simply, Private Lake, access by owner permission only. Trespassing subject to legal action. Full legal parcel number. My name, registered owner. I mounted it to a cedar post just at the trail where the HOA walking path met the lake edge. They didn't remove that sign. Not this time, because now they knew better. The neighborhood forums went into meltdown mode. Screenshots flooded in. Neighbors asking, wait, so do we still have lake rights? What happens to the fishing club membership I paid for last year? Did Karen really not verify the deed before creating all those rules? The best part? The HOA board, known for long-winded newsletters and sanctimonious reminders about fence height or pet leash lengths, went completely silent. No updates, no meetings, just a collective duck in cover while the truth spread like wildfire. Karen, for her part, tried one last desperate spin. She hosted a lake awareness chat in her driveway, complete with folding chairs and a PowerPoint clicker, trying to claim the HOA had been operating under presumed jurisdiction and that it was all a simple misunderstanding. But her audience wasn't buying it. Someone in the crowd asked, so, did you actually read the ownership records before you impounded the man's boat? Karen stammered, gave a non-answer, changed the topic to water safety. Half the group walked out. Within a week, the Whisper Ridge Board received 3 formal resignation letters. The treasurer stepped down first, citing internal miscommunication and poor transparency. Translation? He didn't want to get sued. The event coordinator was next. She sent an email to the entire neighborhood saying she didn't sign up to be lied to by a power-hungry lake czar. That line got shared more than the HOA's own newsletter. And then came Karen. She wasn't removed all at once. That would have been too clean. Instead, she clung to her title on the Lake Use Committee, even after the committee itself was dissolved. She tried to shift focus to gardening projects, organize HOA potlucks, even write about duck migration patterns. But it didn't work. The trust was broken. And when residents started openly referring to her as Captain No Lake, she finally did what she should have done from the beginning. She stepped down. No statement. No fanfare. Just gone. In the weeks that followed, a new tone settled over Whisper Ridge. Not fear, just awareness. Boundaries, real ones, were now recognized. No more HOA newsletters about lake permits. No more laminated warnings on the trail fence. And absolutely no more community fines for skipping Karen's kayak registration. Instead, I started getting quiet knocks at my cabin door. A family asking if they could show their kid how to cast a line, like they used to when Grandpa was around. A retired couple bringing fresh baked bread and asking, respectfully, if they could sit by the dock for sunset, like they had 20 years earlier. And me? I let the good ones back in. On my terms. I printed a new version of the sign a month later. Same post, same parcel number. But this time, I added something at the bottom. In memory of Grandpa, who fished this lake before anyone tried to rule it. Not for the HOA. Not for the neighbors. For me. For him. And for every quiet morning on the water that deserved better than a clipboard and a threat. The dock looked just like it used to, maybe a little more worn at the edges, but still sturdy, still honest. And now it had something new. Right where the first set of wooden planks met dry ground, I installed a small, weatherproof bronze plaque. No grand ceremony, no announcement. Just me, a power drill, and a quiet moment at sunrise. The engraving read, "In memory of Grandpa, the only man who ever owned this water." And that was the truth. He didn't just fish it, he lived it, protected it, kept it wild and clean long before property maps had boundaries and HOA bylaws got photocopied into 50-page welcome packets. This was his lake, and now it was mine to protect, not out of pride, but out of legacy. The neighborhood settled quickly after the chaos. Once Karen stepped down and the HOA board stopped pretending they could patrol the shoreline, things got quiet, almost like they'd been holding their breath and could finally exhale. A few residents came by in the weeks that followed, some with store-bought apologies, some with sincere regret. One family brought fresh-caught trout and said they were sorry for going along with things they didn't really understand. Another couple asked, with visible humility, if they could sit on the dock like they used to years ago before it became a battlefield. I said yes, to some of them, not out of revenge, just boundaries. This lake didn't need more rules. It needed respect, and now it had it. I never posted photos, never bragged online, never told the story more than once, because the truth was bigger than HOA drama or neighborhood politics. This wasn't about a fishing boat. It wasn't even about a deed. It was about not letting anyone, no matter how loud or self-righteous, rewrite the history of something you love. Not when it carries your grandfather's footprints. Not when the water still remembers the weight of his oars. I still visit the lake every week, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to cast a line. The boat still creaks when I shift too hard to one side. The old thermos is still tucked under the bench, and the plaque glints in the sunlight, like it's watching over everything. The HOA doesn't talk much about the lake anymore. The fishing club never came back, but the people who matter, they still wave when they pass. They nod with a kind of understanding, the kind that doesn't come from meetings or voting rights. It comes from knowing that some places aren't managed. They're remembered that if your HOA thinks calling the cops gives them control over what they never owned, remind them, water remembers. It remembers who first cast a line at sunrise, long before streetlights and bylaws and laminated notices. It remembers the old hands that built the dock, not for compliance, but for peace. Because when someone stands tall and throws rules around like they carry more weight than a lifetime of ownership, all it takes is one piece of paper, signed, stamped, and older than their entire subdivision, to remind them where the real power is. And when that deed has your name on it, no HOA meeting, no vote, no community ordinance changes that truth. Let them build fences. Let them hold clipboards. But when you're the one standing at the shoreline, and the lake is still reflecting your family's name, they can't take it. They never could, because legacy isn't just a story you tell. It's the water you protect, the ground you stand on, and the boat you refuse to let them steal without a fight.